Hello and welcome to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. I am Tolly Botts and this is Aaron Terrell. And today we are going to be talking about the trans umbrella. This is a term that most people are probably familiar with. This is a term that a lot of trans activists use to describe the widening definition of what transgender is supposed to mean in our modern society. And so when trans activists or allies talk about the trans umbrella, what they're typically trying to get at is this is no longer just the transsexuals, that in order to classify as transgender, you don't need to have a quote unquote binary trans identity. And you don't even necessarily need to take medical steps to look like the opposite sex. The new definition of the trans umbrella, according to trans activists, is anybody whose gender identity does not match with their sex, or as the activists would say, their sex assigned at birth. And so this is sort of the gender queers and the non-binaries and the demi boys and demi girls. All of the people that kind of make it onto the libs of TikTok, right? All of the people with the beards and the long hair and the breasts who are kind of gender fucking. That is what the activists mean when they're talking about the trans umbrella. But we're going to talk about this graphic that has been making the rounds on Twitter, coming from a gender critical account where he's sort of cleverly using the activist language and flipping it and saying, well, here's the actual trans umbrella. And the creator of this image basically said that the group of like vulnerable people who have maybe historically been identifying as trans or had gender dysphoria, and the predators, as he puts it, have all been grouped together under this trans umbrella, and that we need to be able to differentiate between these distinct types of trans identifying people in order to fight trans ideology. And from what I could see, this post got a lot of positive attention and it was being spread by a lot of gender critical accounts. And when Aaron and I were talking about it, like it's pretty clever and the setup is pretty cool, right? This idea of like who's holding up this umbrella, who's reinforcing this culturally, and all of the different types of people who are getting caught up in trans ideology. But pretty quickly, I noticed just a few glaring issues with this graphic. And the first thing that jumped out at me is that under the vulnerable category over here, we have autistic people, basically, teens who are struggling with their puberty and with autism. And then over on the opposite end of the predators and the threats, we have the autogynephiles and the fetishists. And I think this overlooks the fact that most of the people who are the males, the autistic, nerdy, shy, awkward males who are identifying as trans women, are the autogynephiles. And I think, yeah, that's where we kind of want to start with this conversation today. And then we'll kind of go through the rest of the graphic, because I think there's some good in there, there's some truth in there, and then there's a lot that we're getting wrong. I think that the gender critical movement is getting wrong because it's politically expedient.
Yeah. And like we were saying, when we first kind of peaked, as they say, and kind of entered into the gender critical sphere, I think this is how a lot of us first look at it as well, as, there's the vulnerable people and then the people who are taking advantage. And but the more you kind of observe the phenomenons, that are existing under the trans umbrella. They're this trying to put these categories of the vulnerable, the trendy hop-ons, and the predators threats. It's like these are not distinct categories at all. Especially as you were saying, it's like they put under predators and threats autogynephiles, yet the autogynephiles are the teens struggling with puberty and are autistic, etc. I mean, that's where that struggle comes from. And another thing that I think I first even I'm kind of been doing this whole destigmatized autogynephilia beat. Not, I wouldn't put it that way, but that's what I'm often accused of. But that's actually not what first stood out to me. What first stood out to me is that somehow the trendy hop-ons aren't also vulnerable. The trendy hop-ons are usually teenage girls, young women, kind of lonely adolescents who need an identity, and trans becomes that identity, that social group that they can belong to, that righteous calling, and they often fall into the actual medical transition trap as an extension of their commitment to this ideology. And I see them as incredibly vulnerable. And they aren't. It seems really kind of callous and cruel to think of these kind of lonely, awkward young women who need a group to belong to as like hop-ons. It's just I don't know. They are just as vulnerable as and a lot of them are also autistic and histories of sexual abuse, whatever it may be. These just are not at all finite categories in any way. I think that's what first.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. When I was going through this, I kind of skipped over the trendy hop-ons at first, but I think that's completely correct. It's easy, and he puts the examples here, like these are the counterculture kids, right? The formerly punk and goth kids. And I know we say that a lot. I know we and by we I mean the gender criticals. That's a kind of a meme that I've heard a lot, and it made sense to me at one point. And so I don't know what you think about this, Aaron, but I don't know if that's entirely the right way to frame it anymore.
Well, I think there is still a lot of merit to it, because I think the kids who were the goths and who were the punks or whatever, those were the kids from the same category of kind of lonely. They don't have a strong sense of communal identity in their families or their larger culture. They're kind of lonely, isolated, awkward, and that the goth or punk, it had like this it was like a culture that they could belong to, and it does come also with a sense of moral righteousness, and it's still that whole counterculture
totally
thing.
Right.
It provides the same thing that the trans thing does, or it provided the same thing that the trans thing does now, to the same types of people, the same vulnerable young people.
I think you're right. Actually, I had forgotten how much goth and punk were kind of political identities too. They really weren't just aesthetic. Yeah, they were very angsty political kind of movements within their own right. So I think that's
especially punk. Yeah.
And so I think what I meant when I was saying that before was sort of like these seem like maybe the kids who would be more likely to take on the less the more of a non-binary identity, maybe more of the she theys, the girls with long blue hair who maybe call themselves he or something, who are taking it on for more aesthetic purposes, but are believe in that political ideology. But I think I actually agree with you, and I think the problem with that is that we have today is that because there are almost no gatekeeping mechanisms depending on where you live, people who take it on as an aesthetic or as sort of a political social thing, they're able to get to make these sort of lifelong decisions about their body, basically, and that's part of the culture of being trans, is that trans people do this thing, Right. So it's being suggested and it's all around them. And yeah, there's truth to this idea that it's sort of like a carousel. Like even if there is no one pushing or pressuring a child or adult even to do this, there's very much a carousel of people get on, right? You get on and you start the cross-sex hormones.
Mhm.
And then you do maybe a top surgery if you're a female, or you're getting, you're starting to grow breasts and maybe do implants if you're a male, right? And then you think about maybe the bottom surgery. So there is a very clear like trajectory for people to take, even if there's no one putting specific pressure on them. Yeah, so I think that's right, that this is
I do want to disagree
this,
there. I don't think it's carousel for the males. I don't think I don't think
fair.
that they're just like a finding the social identity in trans and then I have to validate it by doing medical things. I think that's like the girls who get sucked into that, whereas the boys, I think if they're getting breast implants, they're without a doubt autogynephilic, I would say.
Yeah. No, I actually completely agree with you. And that's something that is also a limitation of this graphic, is that it's not making a distinction between the males and the females. That's a huge limitation here. Yeah. So I completely think you're correct. What we're talking about right now, the people who are likely to do something, and it might feel right at the time, that is more socially, motivated or culturally contaged or whatever, are the females for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a limitation of this. I guess I see, once again, just like the issue with making these three distinct groups, a lot of the hop-ons and the trendy people I also see as absolutely vulnerable.
Mhm.
So it's like, yes, these are the punks and the goths and the anorexics and the
Right.
cutters,
Right.
like it's those are also the people who would be considered the sort of trendy hop-ons, right? The people who are taking on a social identity to make meaning of themselves and to yeah, that and this is again particularly true for the females.
Yeah. I think that's what even Lisa Littman, when she coined rapid onset gender dysphoria, I'm not sure she understood entirely what she was seeing, and I think this is what it is with these girls. They opt into a social categorization that is trans. It's a political worldview, kind of like a political philosophy, a semi-religion. Obviously, cult is thrown around disparagingly, but it's accurate. It's a social movement that appeals to particularly young females. And how you tell people who are not in your political philosophical cult that you are trans and belong to this movement is by saying that you have gender dysphoria. Is like that is how the external world understands what trans is. And so you have gender dysphoria, and that's how the the cishet world validates and accepts your unique and sacred transness, is through this this diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And so I think that's what a lot of what we understand as rapid onset gender dysphoria is, not so much actual gender dysphoria as what we consider gender dysphoria, so much as it is rapid onset trans identification, and that is communicated via I have gender dysphoria. I identify as a trans, or I identify as a trans boy, when really what they're saying is I identify as, as part of this gender abolitionist movement. And to communicate that means I'm a trans boy or a trans guy or a non-binary or something like that. But yeah, then the external response to that is diagnosis, medicalization, etc. And it's like, oh yeah, if you're trans, then this is what you do. And yeah, and how the carousel begins. And like with the goths and the punks, they were getting tattoos to.
Yeah, I was gonna say they were also modifying their bodies in ways,
shaving
and
off
their
eyebrows, or doing these body modifications
and making themselves social pariahs.
Right. Yes. There's like a righteousness.
There was a righteousness. Yes, there was a very subversive. Yes.
Yep.
Which is an impulse that I can like relate to. Not that I ever like did any of those things necessarily, but yeah, like that makes sense, especially for young angsty people.
Yep. 100%.
It's interesting what you were just talking about made me think that like this distinction between the vulnerable and the trendy hop-ons was sort of the first schism, or not the first, but like the big schism in the trans community of the too cutes versus the true scum. It's
Right.
like, no. The
Right.
vulnerable, those are those amongst us with the gender dysphoria. The people with, maybe the brain in the wrong body, because some of the trans medicalists also believe some kooky gender things and some unscientific things. But that was the distinction that, yeah, there you go. That was the distinction that they were trying to make, right? Some of you people are just taking on this identity and you're not even in pain, you're not even suffering, you're not even doing anything to look like the opposite sex, and you're hurting our movement, us amongst us, the vulnerable amongst us.
Yep. That's completely how I first saw it as well.
Yeah.
It's like there's the ones who are imitating my real medical condition,
right?
But then I was realizing that they're actually saying, no, I don't experience gender dysphoria. Meanwhile, they're injecting themselves with testosterone. It's like they are vulnerable. Something is going on here that is very, very scary and dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next thing I'm about to say is like, slightly going into a bit of a tangent, but I think too, there's like, there is a cohort for whom, and it feels like this is like a very kind of a class thing, or like a educational, it's like there are people who take on some type of like trans pronoun essentially, but do nothing else and never will. And as far as I can tell, really aren't at risk of medicalizing in any way. But they know that it is, you are like, you're moving yourself away from the oppressor if you call yourself she, they.
Right.
And you can kind of just be an old school feminist and call yourself she, they. So all you have to do is like grow your armpit hair out, and then you can still wear dresses and have your long hair and wear makeup and be she, they. And I think a lot of those people probably aren't, like I said, aren't, not that they're not vulnerable in their own ways, because they believe pretty stupid stuff, but that's not the same cohort of people who are rapidly coming out to their parents at 13 years old in a group with their friends at school, right? And actually wanting to medicalize. That there's different things going on for these people. I think, which maybe brings me to my next point, which is there are both a million distinctions that you can make between the different people who fall under the trans umbrella. And I think the conclusion that I've come to is that is less important than just getting to the root of reality. And so it's like the only reason that the she, theys that I'm talking about, who are women, who just simply are, they're the only thing that they've done is take on a part-time they pronoun.
And they do it essentially just say like, I believe in your religion, or I endorse this movement.
I also believe that gender is more important than sex. Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the problem with all of this is the society and the culture that has gone along with this, that has said, yes, trans women are women and trans men are men. And actually sex is not, it's not immutable and it's not binary. I think that is much more the issue than, or rather that's the issue that needs to be tackled, because even if we were able to get rid of the predators and the threats, let's say, right? I know that there are a lot of gender criticals for a good reason who still don't want the vulnerable or the trendy hop-ons playing in women's sports, right? Like, so just eliminating the one that we feel icky about doesn't fix the problem, because the problem to me is not that the problem is not Leah Thomas wanting to swim for the women's team. It's the, what is it, the NCAA or whatever, agreeing that should happen, agreeing that if you identify as a woman and take cross-sex hormones for a year, that you functionally are and should have access to all of those spaces. And so I don't think that trying to differentiate who is the predator amongst them is going to do anything to remediate this problem. If you still believe that the quote unquote vulnerable shouldn't be playing in women's sports, then figuring out who the baddies are and the fetishists are isn't going to get you any closer to that goal.
And it's, yeah, especially because when we're talking about sports, we're typically talking about high school and college sports, right? And the boys that are playing in the, like, say specifically the high school girls teams, these are your nerdy, autistic, autogynephilic boys. Now, some of them are there because they are obviously told by society that their desire to be a woman or to be a girl means they are a girl, and therefore they should be playing with the girls. Some may be playing there because it's like, oh, I'll win, I'm going to be better, I think those are much fewer. Then there are also some, these are teenage boys we're talking about here. Everybody remembers teenage boys. Plenty of them are also going to be doing it because it gains them access to the girls' locker rooms. Just because they're under 18 does not mean they don't have that kind of what we would call predatory intentions, right? But the entire society is structured in such a way as to enable all of this. It doesn't matter what their intentions are. It doesn't matter what their, psychology is, etc. But yeah, we have to remember that it's not just the 45-year-olds who are, accessing, women's changing facilities that are a danger to women and girls. Teenage boys are also a danger to women and girls when they're being told, like, so we've got them classed as the vulnerable in this category on this graphic, but they aren't necessarily vulnerable. I mean, they're vulnerable to an ideology that's going to send them down a path of medicalization without understanding what their root driver is. But they're also, in a predatory category if they are, again, gaining access to the women's locker room for the very reason every teenage boy would want access to the girls' locker room. Like, we can't just be naive and think that, under 18, vulnerable victims, etc.
Yeah, and I think I get like itchy when you say some of that because like I maybe I'm naive. I'm inclined to believe that of the three categories that you just sort of listed, that the first is the largest. The people who are just like, they're having these gender feelings. Maybe it's autogynephilic gender feelings. Maybe it even is erotic, but they want to be a woman, and society is telling them that you are actually a woman. If you want to, you are, and that means that you should go in there. I'm inclined to believe that category is much larger than the people who literally think I'll do better in girls' sports, and the people who think, well, damn, I get to see all these naked women. But I agree, all the categories exist, and I think it's not widening the trans umbrella that made this issue, but society, again, denying the reality of biological sex has opened the door for anyone, literally anyone, to get there.
Right. I agree with you that the ones who, just the standard autogynephilic boys who are told that these feelings mean that they are women, and that's all facilitated. I agree that those are the majority. But my point is like, there's no way to know the difference. There's no way to know which is the boy who's, doing this to see the boobs in person, and, who's been battling gender dysphoria since 12 years old. Like, there's no way to know the difference. And to your point, it's the ideology, it's the facilitation of all of this. That's the problem, not those individual boys' motivations.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And like, how we deal with this, I think ideally, is like, we live in a society with mutual respect where trans people, people who want to change their appearance and identify as the opposite sex will have all civil protections and will not be socially ostracized. And trans people give certain things up to live that life. It's a compromise. And that's, I think, where we need to get back to.
Right.
Yeah. That's what it needs to be. It's like, again, I think all these things feed each other. If the trans women and the trans girls would accept that I have a natural biological advantage, and so it's not fair for me to participate in women's sports, then people are less likely to say, oh, you're a trans person, you're a cheat, and a freak, and all of these things. Like, we're feeding this.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
completely.
almost like, I don't know if this is like too, if this is not analogous, but it reminded me for a second of like affirmative action, and it's like if you let quote unquote people of color get in on their own merits, right, and have the same access, and you don't give preferential treatment, you then eliminate people thinking that every time they see a person of quote unquote person of color, I fucking hate that term, but I'm
Yeah.
using it to be facetious, but you eliminate then people assuming when they see that person that they got here, they were given some extra help, or there is some diversity
Right.
hire or something. Um, yeah, that's not a perfect analogy, but it just, I think you set people up for failure sometimes, when you do things that society is not going to accept, when you try
And
to
then resent.
force and resent.
Right.
Yes,
And then that
totally.
puts us in a more vulnerable place than before.
Totally.
Yep.
Totally. Yeah. And I just want to, like, I don't know why I feel compelled to do this, but I think it's important. I think, like, a lot of, I have a hard time believing, and I guess we're kind of focusing on the sports now here, and that's the first thing on the predators and threats, right? Is the sports cheats. And Aaron and I were kind of talking about this before we started hitting record, but I really don't think that almost anyone is doing this literally to cheat in sports. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, culturally, we don't we don't like the idea of like a man beating the shit out of like we have this like understanding that boys are sort of supposed to be gentle with girls and stuff, and so culture is not going to take kindly to seeing some man beating a woman in some type of sport, and that's what we saw with the visceral emotional reaction to what was going on at the Olympics. And so I think like a person who's still going to put themselves in that position does not see themselves as a man getting a good deal to win. They actually see themselves as a woman. They actually believe that they are some type of persecuted woman. Um, Otherwise, I don't see it would possibly feel good. And they're going to
Right.
get the backlash of people who tell them that you're a cheat and like this wasn't fair and you sucked at like. So I don't think that's actually part of the psychology for most quote unquote like trans girl or trans
Yep.
women athletes. I really don't.
Yep. Yeah, because if they did view it that way, they also wouldn't take any pride
No
in that
pride in
success.
winning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Good
think
point.
most of them are just completely deluded by gender ideology. I think that's the
Right.
and or the very gripping psychology that AGP can be, right?
Right.
So that's AGP is playing a role there for sure,
Hmm.
but it's not. The role is not, oh, I am man and I'm gonna get to win now and I'll get to be a more successful swimmer if I go into the girls' league. That's not
Right.
what's happening there.
Right. And yeah, that's another good point because that would be actually wounding to the AGP understanding
So
of
wounding.
himself. Yeah. Yep.
Correct. Seeing
Very good point.
themselves as actually a man with some unfair advantage against these girls. Yeah, exactly. So
Right.
I think, yeah, so while I firmly believe that males should not be playing in most if not all female sports, I also don't believe I believe very very few see it that way.
Yep.
Like they don't see themselves as cheaters. They're not trying to cheat. They're not trying to get a better score. They are women who love sports and just want an opportunity to compete in the thing, like that's it.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Which is
This
again why
reminds
I go back to it's the culture that's the issue. Because the sports leagues are letting them in. The problem is the NCAA allowing Leah Thomas to go into this league. It's not AGP. AGP,
right.
Leah being AGP is not the issue here.
Right.
The
Yep.
issue is all of the adults in the room who said, yes, you should go into the women's changing room while everyone is getting completely naked as swimmers, right? And doing these very tight and difficult changes. The issue is everyone who thought that was normal, that we should allow that to happen. It's
Right.
not AGP. That's not the issue at hand here, as far as
Yep.
I see it, at least.
Yep. I completely agree. Something I've been saying for a long time now is that while I completely agree with most of the kind of like gender critical uh, demands for getting things back to reality and undoing all of this trans enabling stuff, but where I disagree though is in misrepresenting the internal motivations of the people
Yeah.
who are enabling it.
Mhm.
And I guess, yeah, we'll get to the who's holding up the umbrella in a little bit, but you reminded me of that. It's like what Leah Thomas is thinking, what all of these individuals are thinking. It's like we're completely missing them. We're not going to be successful in undoing this by misrepresenting what people are actually motivated by.
Mhm.
And especially when we're ascribing these really kind of villainous motivations on them, because then obviously their supporters are going to be so much more invested in defending them against
Mhm.
that. So there's that, but then also, yeah, it's just because we're getting it wrong about what their motivation is. That's not strategic at all.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can already hear people saying, "I don't care what their motivations are." And same, and that's kind of our
Right,
point, right? Is because the
right.
motivation actually is not what's at
It
issue
doesn't
here.
matter. Yeah,
Right. The
it could be
problem
anything.
is
Yeah,
that exactly. The problem is that culturally that all Western societies right now are basically denying the reality of sex and saying that you can actually go participate in all of these women's spaces and activities and whatever if you identify as such.
yep,
That right.
exactly.
Yeah, which then gets me on like, okay, so if you agree that the motivation doesn't matter, then why do you spend so many hours a day in graphic detail trying to talk about like the fetishistic nature of AGP? And it's like because it's emotional, it makes people react emotionally and respond viscerally. And when people feel emotional reactions are more likely to act and engage.
Yeah, the algorithm.
Yeah. It's the algorithm and it's like the brain.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I meant like, yeah,
Yeah,
like human
right,
brains
right.
respond in the same way that the algorithm is set up
Yeah.
to.
Right. That's why the algorithm. Yeah, exactly.
Right, right, right.
Um,
But I guess we covered the who. Should we get into the where he gets into the what they need?
yeah, this one's hilarious.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry,
yeah,
Elliot.
so
It's hilarious.
it's sorry. um, yeah, so the vulnerable, what they need is evidence-based healthcare, which I think it's interesting that the trendy hop-ons and the predators don't need evidence-based healthcare. It's really only the vulnerable people that need this. Okay. They need empowered parents and they need compassion and love. The trendy hop-ons, they need tolerance when possible or where possible and pushback where necessary. And then the predators and threats, they need scrutiny and suspicion, accountability, and deterrence and prevention. Back to sort of stating the obvious, the vulnerable and the predators and threats is when we're talking about males. There's like almost a one-to-one overlap there.
Right.
It's basically the same category, and so it is ironic that the prescriptions for what these people need are so vastly different, right? One side needs compassion and love, and the other side needs scrutiny and suspicion.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I
yeah,
do. Okay, so maybe put. I think maybe when they're talking about the predators, maybe they aren't thinking about actual people with actual autogynephilia. They're thinking about people who are actually predatorily taking advantage of the trans movement. Unfortunately, the person who wrote this, I don't think that he understands that there's a difference between those two things. People who
mhm,
are autogynephilic, have gender dysphoria, are under the impression that they are literally women because of these feelings that they have, etc.
mhm,
And the men who very much know that they're men and very much want access to women. I think that's a very, very, very tiny number of people. And but yeah, that's being conflated with basically all adult male transitioners is
yeah,
is essentially what I think is being said here. which is
Yeah. No, and that's a
wacky.
good point. And like there are people who deserve scrutiny and suspicion. And I think like for example, a distinction is like Leah Thomas transitioning and then going on to play or to swim for the women's team in college seems very different. And again, like I'm like not here to defend Leah Thomas. I don't think that should have happened the way that it did. But that's not the same thing as like the criminal who decides to start their transition once they've been arrested and are now waiting to be placed in a prison, right? Those are like,
Right.
yes, we should be very suspicious of someone
Right.
whose onset of their trans identity is before they are being assigned to a male or female prison, is before they get sent to the men's prison, right?
The POGD, prison onset gender dysphoria.
Did you just make that up?
I don't know. I'm sure it's been said before, but I've
That
seen the
is
prison onset gender dysphoria, but
hilarious.
POGD, I think
That is hilarious. Yeah, exactly. Right. And yeah, I think another thing that just
I think it was actually J.K. Rowling who said prison onset gender dysphoria, but POGD
wow,
just to
okay.
yeah.
That's really good, honestly. Yeah, I just think it's interesting too, like only the vulnerable people need evidence-based healthcare. Well, right now everyone is getting access to quote unquote healthcare.
Right.
The vulnerable, the trendy hop-ons, and the predators are all going into the same fucking gender clinics right now.
Yep.
And so I'm sure to like not to I'm sure that the creator of this didn't mean that the vulnerable people should get good health care and everyone else should be allowed to continue on with the crazy lawless, gatekeeperless thing that exists right now. But it is this sort of yeah, just like a lack of understanding of what's going on and just how mixed these categories are, because there are autogynephiles and sports cheats, people playing right in women's sports when they shouldn't, who are also getting access to these drugs on the basis of self-identity, who are also being also led to believe that you can change sex in some meaningful way, who are also being led to believe that anyone who misgenders you hates you and actually wishes harm against you.
And they're also the ones who are getting these really not so anyway, these pretty terrible genital reconstructive surgeries. And I'm sorry, if you think that these people are predators, I don't know, wouldn't you kind of want them to continue receiving that kind of healthcare? It's like if you like, I don't know,
Right.
sexual predators, sexually castrating them. I mean, who's arguing with that, right? Like, I mean, there's an ethical argument to be had there, but that's not the point. I mean,
No, but
people who
that's
think they're predators, like,
no, that's
sure,
that is an interesting point though, especially because these same people will use that word to describe these drugs. We are giving, castration
right,
drugs and stuff. This is
right,
what we used. These puberty blockers is what we use to castrate sex offenders, right? This is like a very common and true sort of
hmm
meme in the gender critical discourse, right? And it's like, well, then if you think that some of these people are actual sex offenders, wouldn't you want them to be castrated then?
right, yeah.
Right, which again, I'm not saying that whatever. I don't know how I
Yeah,
feel about anything like that, but yeah, there's not a clear understanding. And I don't think everything is really logically consistent in this prescription
yeah.
for how to deal with this. I also think it's interesting, the prescription for the trendy hop-ons: tolerance where possible and pushback where necessary. I actually think that's what all of these people need. That's what this needs. This is the compromise that I was talking about earlier. We need tolerance where possible and pushback where necessary.
Yep.
We need to go back to the days. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion. We need to go back to the days where as long as you pass and you're just going in to do your business, you don't have any issues in the bathroom. But we also need to go back to the days where if you flash your penis, that the that you are thrown out and not the woman who goes to complain about you to the front desk. We
Right.
need to go back to tolerance for the people who are trying to live their lives not authentically, because I don't know what any of that bullshit means anymore, but that are trying to just live their lives, and keep to themselves and have a good life, and push back where where reality meets the road.
Yep. Yep.
I think
No, I
that's
mean
what
that
all of these people need. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. That should have just been across the board there.
Yeah.
I'm just really
Um,
kind of stuck on this whole trendy hop-ons category in general, just because it's like if most of the people who are in like the gender critical space, I think they kind of understand that the majority of the transitioners are adolescent females who fit this description. And so it's like, I don't know, I just don't understand. Where is the sympathy? Where is the it just doesn't make
no,
any sense.
that's a really good point. But of course, in this graphic, those people that you're talking about are the vulnerable.
Right.
And it kind of gets back to like, we only have sympathy for the people we like.
Right.
It's kind of like you consider someone, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but it seems like maybe people like the creator of this, and this is whatever, again, no shade to this person. It seems like detransitioners are the vulnerable, the people who renounce the ideology. Then we can reconstruct, we can look at their experience as having been vulnerable. But if they persist in this identity, then they are the trendy hop-ons.
Or the predators.
Right. If I like you, it kind of feels like then you're vulnerable. And if I don't, then you're not. And I'm sure that's a straw man, and I really don't mean to do that.
But that is a lot like how gender critical, a lot of gender criticals, they do present it that way. It's like if somebody's a detransitioner, it doesn't matter why they transitioned in the first place. It doesn't matter, if their story is inconsistent. It's almost considered blasphemous to ask those questions of them, or to kind of hold them to a same kind of narrative standard as anyone else, in the exact same way that in the trans community, if you hold actively trans people to any of those standards, it's considered blasphemous. Or if you don't ask questions about why they transitioned, etc., that's the blasphemy. But in the gender critical sphere, if you ask those questions of detransitioners, then you're blaspheming. And it's because, okay, now this person is on my side, and so we protect and adore this person, and they've been a victim, they can do no wrong, in the exact same way that the trans does that. But I am curious which category I am in as an actively trans person, not currently identifying as a detransitioner. Am I vulnerable? Am I a trendy hop-on, or am I a threat and a predator? I'm very curious to learn that about myself. So
I'm curious too. There's people who have probably called you all of these things. There are people. There's the ultras. Yeah. To the ultras, you're a predator and a threat, because any trans person who doesn't detransition is doing woman face or man face.
A sex faker or whatever.
Sex faker. Yeah. Yes, exactly. That whole shtick. And then there are the people who like to tell you that you are essentially a traumatized lesbian.
Right.
Which is always cool. Which is always cool, especially considering you hadn't been with women until you transitioned, but you were actually a traumatized lesbian, and that was the impetus for your transition.
I was a self-hating lesbian, despite the fact that I really wished I was a lesbian, but I just couldn't.
Literally. Yeah. But no, what you just said, that really struck me. You're right. It is the inverse, or the same thing, rather, that happens in the trans community, where you can't question any trans person's story, right? Because what they say. And you're right. Part of it is this, like, we're like adoring them and wanting to protect them. But part of it is totally, I think, politically motivated. Like, you can't question it because we've got a goal here.
Yes.
On both sides. in the trans community, you can't question it, because if then they say something that is not going to sound good, that's going to hurt trans people, and we need to keep pushing forward. And even if there are bad apples, trans women are women and trans men are men. And it's the same thing it's like, we can't right, we need these people because they are the ones saying that that it's wrong, and they are the victims that we need to use as the face of it. And so questioning nuance really damages
the momentum, like the momentum of the movement. And I think, and how much of it too is like the mollycoddling is like encouraging other people, like in the trans identity. Obviously, when you're just celebrated and mollycoddled, and you can do no wrong, that's really appealing to other people. It's like, oh, if I'm trans, then nobody can, say boo to me either. It's like in the gender critical sphere, it's like if you just hold up the detransitioners as these darlings, these untouchables, it's like maybe that will motivate more trans people to detransition and join the holy sacred untouchable cast of detransitioners. I do wonder if that's probably a smaller motivation, but I think that might be part of it, is like an encouragement effort.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Right. Especially on the gender critical side. We need them. We need the detransitioners. Nobody say anything. Stop it. Don't question them. And again, a lot of these people, they really went through some, like you have been known to say, some of these people paid the ultimate price. And so they do deserve our sympathy. And they deserve chiefly, like, they deserve medical attention, right? Like they deserve a lot of social supports and whatever. But yeah, it is totally, we need the gender critical movement relies on detransitioners to make their point, which again is interesting, and I think different from what I've been trying to say. Not that I'm just, well, obviously I'm perfect and always right, but it's like I don't think we need detransition to be a huge phenomenon for us to, again, get back to the reality of fucking sex.
Right.
Even if most people who transition are going to actually be happy. And maybe part of that is because regret is such a difficult thing. And Stella O'Malley has talked about this a lot. And I think in a really compelling way, that people don't regret easily, especially if you've given a certain amount of time and money and whatever into something. And it might, and also like, what is the utility of regret when you're past a certain point? So I think that's all fair. So, but we don't need detransition rates to be super high for there to be issues with trans ideology. There are lots of issues with trans ideology that are completely separate from detransition, basically.
Yeah. We don't need detransitioners to know that males should not be in women's prison and on their sports team. It doesn't take detransitioner. It shouldn't take detransitioners for us to see that into. Right. We don't need detransitioners to know that sex is real. Right.
And immutable and binary.
Right. Yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And those, I think, are the fights worth having. But okay. So the what they get to, I think this is actually kind of getting progressively like more ridiculous, frankly. The vulnerable get mutilation and harm.
And the other two don't get that?
Exactly. And then but the predators get glorified, but the hop-ons and the vulnerable don't? What are you talking about? Anybody who takes on this gendered soul gets glorified in this trans affirmative culture, because the
exactly
culture is
why the hop-ons are doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And
untreated root causes all the way across the board.
Yeah.
Okay, terrified and misinformed parents, that could be specific to, because they're talking about, when they say the vulnerable, I think they just mean under 18s. Maybe is that why it's
no, but no.
Okay.
But no, actually, I think it's okay, again, not to shit on this person, but I think it's actually much less sophisticated than that. I think it's kind of what people say, where it's like when they're 17, they're an ROGD boy and they're vulnerable, and then when they're 25, they're not a gynophile, evil predator fetishist. I think it's just more of the I think it was less intentional. I don't think the vulnerable was necessarily meant to denote under 18s exclusively. I think it's just back to this, like, these are all kind of feels of how we feel about these different groups. Right. That's what I think that is.
Yep. Victims versus
yes.
predators. Yeah.
Yeah. Oppressed and oppressors.
Yep.
That's even showing up here.
Yep. Yeah.
This is This is a conversation that I've been having lately is like I think one of the reasons that I'm sort of viscerally turned off by the gender critical movement lately is like it's seeming very woke to me.
Yeah.
When like part of my peaking was my unwokening, right? And trying to move away from all of that. Like, yeah, like the people on my side, the gender critical side, saying that like that men shouldn't be allowed to wear women's clothes because we won't be able to determine who amongst them might have a paraphilia, and that we need to stop this because bisexual people or straight people are identifying as gay, and it's like, I don't know, it's all very identitarian and starting to feel very woke to me. But yeah.
Yeah, I was really appreciative of GenSpect until about a year ago when that all went down. But I was very appreciative of GenSpect because they weren't doing, they were so much of the gender critical movement that was doing the whole woke thing of the oppressors versus the oppressed. And I really appreciated GenSpect for not taking that road. But lately now it has been the whole thing where it's like the vulnerable gay kids and then the predatory AGPs. And that was really a depressing shift to witness into that. Yeah. It's not accurate. It's not helpful. It's just identitarian nonsense that really gets in the way of understanding.
Yeah. I was going to say radicalizing, which might be a little extreme, but it's compelling. It's emotional. It invokes emotional responses. And like we said in the beginning, that gets people to peak. And I think you and I have been struggling with this for a while. I remember in one of our early episodes, we talked about sort of the issue with this, like, transing the gay away thing, of like, that is really good messaging and it really activates people. And I remember you said something to the effect of like, okay, so if that brings them in the door, then once they get in the door, we got to be able to say like, okay, now let's talk about what's really going on. Right.
Right.
But I think we're not, most people aren't getting to, okay, what's really going on here? So then that makes me wonder, is it good to do all of this stuff? Yes, it's piquing a lot of people. But if we're only piquing them with like a half truth and then it ends there.
Inaccurate sloganeering back and forth. Yeah. Like it's just choir preaching and people, hand wringing and getting all angry and worked up and not actually understanding what's going on.
And again, it fuels the victimhood mentality and the ferocity of the trans activist side, in part for good reason, because most trans people aren't evil, perverted fetishists who actually want access to women's spaces so that they can violate them and harm them. And so if you keep fucking saying that, the trans activists are correct that that's not true and that that's fear mongering. They're correct.
Right.
And so they're going to, they will be justified in pushing back against that and saying, look at these bigots. This is not true. They're right.
Yep. It's
even if it's not bigotry that's driving it. Right. Oh God. Yeah.
It's our common really refrain here.
Myself.
It's so depressing. Yeah.
Jesus Christ. All right, let's move down to the bottom.
Okay.
Who's holding up the umbrella? Who's holding the umbrella? So who's culpable?
And I think this is one. I think I'm quite appreciative of this section of it. I don't agree with all of it, but I think there's a lot of merit to this. I think. Anyway,
I agree. I think it's a little overly simplistic, as all kind of things like this sort of need to be. But it has a lot more nuance, I think, and it's a little more compassionate. About a lot of the different players. And it also takes into context, which I think is sort of missing up above, is like, this is a societal, cultural issue that is that everything's interacting with each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So Over here on the who's culpable, we have from the left to the right, the people who are scared and are being lied to, all the way up to the predators. So there's people who are scared and being lied to. You have the terrified parents, right, who are being told that, would you rather have a trans daughter or a dead son? I think you and I agree. This is a very real manipulation tactic. It's a manipulation tactic, and to the hormonal, emotional young people, it feels true.
Right. And it's also the message that they've been absorbing online. It's
yes,
like, it's
exactly.
If you don't medicalize, if you don't transition, you are, massively at risk to suicide. And I've heard from people, I think I was in the trans sphere, like when I first started transitioning around 2010, 2012, well before this messaging was really in there. I think it was probably pretty prevalent in the trans women space, because that's where most of the actual real suicidality is, like older aged AGPs. But that whole that suicide talk did not exist whatsoever in the transition spheres I was in. But since then, I have heard from detransitioners, and those that I aren't just like playing to the crowd for sympathy, but one that I've got great respect for. She said that she started to feel like suicidal after like absorbing this messaging over and over again, where it's like it wasn't
100%.
Right. And so it becomes
100%,
like this self-fulfilling thing. Yeah.
This 100%. This was the issue that I've talked about before when I used to study microaggressions when I was working on my PhD. You start like, yes, you're told that the more that you experience these microaggressions, the cumulative negative impact that it has on your mental health, and then your mental health starts deteriorating when you start noticing these things.
Right, because you're chronically
looking for microaggressions. You're ruminating, you're paranoid, exactly. So right. I completely agree. They're absorbing it. They're seeing, and they're actually afraid of it too. Right. So, but this is obviously true. There are terrified parents who are trying to do the right thing. They want their kid to live and to be happy, and some of them brush past their concerns and what their judgment might be in a different case because they are terrified that their kid's going to kill themselves.
Right. So they got like these, very serious concerns about the damage, the medical transition and all the harms that can come from that. But basically the emotional blackmailing of the suicide risk essentially has them squash those concerns because of the more pressing concern of totally. Suicide. So doctors get away with not understanding the negative impacts of these medications, these treatments, because it's like, oh, it's whatever it is, it's not as bad as suicide, right?
And to a certain extent, I think there's some truth to the people who say that is what was the word you just used? Like it's an
emotional blackmail.
Yeah, emotional blackmail. Thank you. There's a certain cluster B element amongst young trans, not just the young ones, but like there's a cluster B element in the trans and probably the LGBT community too. So some of these people are sort of like, it is a blackmail. There are people who use suicide in that way. Those people are mentally ill, which doesn't excuse it, but it helps to explain it. But so there are people who
well, I was going to say, I don't know. So I think a lot of the doctors that aren't necessarily trans themselves or cluster B at all, I think they are squashing their own fears and concerns by believing it, right? Like they are, they have doubts naturally, but they are able to push those down because it's like, oh yeah, there's a suicide risk. And so they want to, they're motivated to believe in this very serious, real risk of suicide, so they don't have to critically look at what they're pushing.
I think that's totally true. Yeah. I meant the cluster B more like the patient, the client, the person who's threatening the suicide. I think some of that is emotional blackmail, and there's like could be some, borderline, whatever things going on there. But the doctors, they have to, that's their last line of defense for themselves, is like, but they were gonna die.
Right.
They were going to die if I didn't do this. Yeah, it's pretty
Yep.
you kind of need to believe that, which I guess sort of goes into the next one, which is the well-meaning and uninformed. This is the confused public. This is the teachers and the social workers. I think that's the majority. I think the
Yep.
largest segment of people is the well-meaning and uninformed people.
Yep.
Those are the people who are going along with the, quote unquote preferred pronouns and all of this stuff. The nice enough people who you'll hear it all the time, like, well, but I'm not trans. I don't understand their experience, and so I can't really, it doesn't make total sense to me, but I don't know their truth kind of thing.
Right.
Um so yeah, they don't know. And maybe they don't want to know. I think a lot of those people probably don't want to know because they don't want to look at it because it's
Right.
uncomfortable and they don't want to be forced to take an unpopular position
Right.
potentially.
Right. Right. They just know that it's bigots who oppose this stuff, and they know they're not bigots, and
Yes.
so I'm going to support it, not think much about it, just go on with my life, and that's about it, I think.
That's 100% true. And there's like, now I'm just in my mind thinking about how much I hate wokeness. But yeah, there's different types of those people too. Yeah, there's the people who are not really speaking about this much, but like you said, I don't want to be a bad person, and it seems like just the bad
Mhm.
people do this. And so, but then there's the people who use it as a weapon and like to uh what's the word? It's performative.
Mhm.
Look how good I am, in fact, that I believe this, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna actually scream about this and make this my hobby as an amazing ally of some sort, right? Because I'm so good and virtuous.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's kind of what the author here is referring to with the self-serving Egypts,
yeah,
where it's like the celebrities and the politicians. It's like, yeah, it's useful, is what it is for them. Um, but I think they still, for the most part, fall into the well-meaning and uninformed. It's like
I agree.
they believe, like, even if it is self-serving, it's like it still feels to them to be, they're a good person. They're doing the
Right.
right thing, and yeah,
Right. The difference between like the well-meaning uninformed and the self-serving idiots are like political activation. I
right,
think the self-serving idiots are also well-meaning and uninformed.
right.
Um,
They're just,
yeah.
yeah, vocal and active.
They're right, exactly. Um, then there's the dangerous ideologues. And I guess this is sort of the lot. We have the media and academia. I can't tell. Is the modern day Mangalas, are they dangerous ideologues or predators? They must be predators if you're going to use the fucking word Mangala. But
And the let's eat the teats.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
they're I think he's got them sort of put in between the two. It's like, yeah, it's a spectrum, right? So the dangerous ideologues are also predators
all
in
right,
this spectrum.
all right. Um, yeah, there's a lot of issues as we get into this end of the spectrum too. I think it's just again, it's just an oversimplification, really. Um, all of it, like including pharma, which I think most people on the left and right are happy to like shout like end big pharma, but I don't believe it would have to be to the level of conspiracy for these pharma companies to literally be thinking this is actually going to hurt people, but if we keep doing it to all of these different people, once you give them this medication, then they're stuck for life, and so they'll need to come back. I don't think most people are thinking that way. Like, I think that is a minority and a minority and a minority, and I think I'm just not inclined to believe the sort of conspiracy theory that would be required for that to actually be some type of top down plan.
Right.
I think it's more so that there's a really perverse incentive structures across the board when you get into the medicalization and even like the therapy and stuff like that. I think there's perverse incentive structures. I'm much more inclined to believe that than actually people are preying on.
Right, like there was some sort of business model to get people hooked on
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yep, I would
Yeah.
agree with you there.
Yeah.
It's just advantageous. It was like, "Oh, wait, this
Yes,
is where the healthcare is
totally.
going. This is what the current understanding is. This will make,
Yeah.
make a good
Right.
amount of money. So yeah, that's great. Let's do it." Yeah.
Right. And to a certain extent, it's dispassionate, even probably on their end. It's sort of like,
Right.
this is just a medication that we make.
Right.
Like
Right. And this is
right. We don't make the laws about who's allowed to use it. We're not the ones with the clinical judgment to decide who to prescribe it to.
right.
And does that make them predatory? I don't know, maybe, right? But I think that's different from intent to sterilize children. Like, I don't think that's what's going on in big pharma, quote
Right.
unquote. The modern day Mengele, that one really bugged me. The one kind of grinds my gears. Let's Eat the Teats. This is referencing that doctor in Florida, Dr. Gallagher, I think is her name.
Yep.
Who has like a whole TikTok presence where, yeah, she talks about eating the teats and is very nonchalant about radical bilateral double mastectomies.
Including on
She also
teenagers.
including on teenagers. She also was like one of the doctors who has decided to get rid of BMI requirements. And so she's become very popular. Maybe I'm naive. I still think that she thinks she's helping people.
Yeah.
And part of that comes into the next thing, why I think calling her or anyone like her Dr. Mengele, modern day Mengele, is so wrong, is because her patients are begging her for this treatment. They are begging her to yeet their teats. Even if it's clinically inappropriate and wouldn't be indicated in this person, even if they're going to go on to regret it. Yeah. Right. They're begging for it. And we can't ignore that here. We can't ignore that. And we can't ignore how that feeds the psychology of these doctors. And when I say that I think they believe they're doing the right thing, why wouldn't they?
Right.
Why wouldn't they think that? They have people coming to them every day describing these similar experiences and saying that this service that you offer is exactly what I need. And then I'm sure they also have lots of people coming to them afterwards and saying, oh my God, thank you so much. My life began today, so I think, yeah, Dr. Mengele's Jesus fucking Christ, victims in the Holocaust were begging to be left the fuck alone and begging not to be operated on and begging to be freed. And so, yeah, it's just, this is the type of hysterical and over the top language that doesn't actually help anyone and that trans people are going to rightfully push back against.
Right.
It's extraordinarily insulting to put Dr. Marcy Bowers and Dr. Mengele in the same category. It's not serious. It is an unserious comparison. And again, it leaves out the fact that these people are begging for it. And we need to figure out as a society what to do about the fact that there are a growing number of people begging for these interventions. And we need to decide as a society if and where and how we're going to put roadblocks or put cutoffs or how we're going to decide who should have access to these things. But this idea that they are actually like evil doctors who are trying to experiment on their patients is just, for the most part, not true. Now, I was going to say, was it ever true? And again, my brain is like really wired against conspiratorial thinking probably to my own detriment to a certain extent, because conspiracies exist. So I know that people actually do conspire. And also my brain has a really hard time going there. but like even the doctors who were like first truly experimenting in like creating these different types of procedures to try to change the appearance, the phenotypical sexual appearance of someone. I don't even know if it would be fair to say that they were like experimental Nazi doctors. They also
It
were
wouldn't.
doing something for people who were begging for it.
Right, right. They would have had the patients who were the most desperate, the most, and they were like, okay,
In a
well,
society where
maybe
no
I can
one
do this. Right,
right, in a society where no one was going to glorify that behavior. They were
right,
still
right.
desperate for it.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, those doctors were, providing it, and we could say, we could talk about, the medical ethics of that, but to say that they were,
Right.
medically experimenting on unconsenting patients is beyond ridiculous.
Right, which is
Yeah,
the
ethics
blatant
is a question, but
implication. If
right,
you use the Dr. Mengele comparison, it is that non-consensual, right, experimentation and inducing human suffering to
on
to
prisoners
satiate.
essentially.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 Um and then the Transhausen mums too. Um are they obviously dangerous? Yes. It still misses part of the psychology to categorize them as predators.
Right, right, because they believe that they are, yeah,
Right. It's fucking
doing
deep.
what's best for their child.
Munchausen's right, Munchausen's and the proxy version, those are really fucking serious and complicated, um, mental illnesses that cause people to, like, poison themselves and their family members. That is very deep. That's not like that's not being done cynically. Um,
Right, or
it's
conspiratorially.
obviously right, right, right.
It's
It's
could be
dangerous,
similar as
obviously.
the kind of trendy hop-ons, if you were. I wonder if it's, we kind of think of a similar cycle. I know like the whole Munchausen thing is quite is serious and pathological, but I do suspect it comes from a similar origin of essentially social needs not being met,
Mhm.
of going to extreme
Right,
lengths to
right.
to garner sympathy and attention.
Yeah,
And it's similar to the whole uh, the trendy hop-ons.
yeah,
Um,
right, right. It's cluster B-ish.
right.
It's got that vibe. Yeah, yeah. Um, is there anything you think we missed in this, Aaron?
I don't think so. I think we might be going in. Is maybe a conversation for another day, but I think the woke bro misogynist he's got here
Mm.
between the self-serving idiots and the dangerous ideologues who are saying trans women are women, you turf harpy what? Anyway, a swear word,
Cunt,
probably the
maybe.
C word.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I think we're both in agreement that those are probably uh,
Pedophiles.
gyneandromorphile. Yeah,
Gaps.
well,
Yeah. Right.
yep. People who are men who are attracted to trans women, and therefore
Right.
need trans women to be regarded as women, because it's how their sexuality works, and so they could be misogynists, but it'd be kind of downstream of what's really going on.
Oh
Um,
no. See. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad you picked this one up because I did just brush over that. I agree with you partially. I think part of that demographic is they're gamps. They're into that kind of mixed male and female phenotype, right?
mhm.
I think some of it might not be that and could truly just be sort of woke bro political posturing.
Right. This is what I
Like
have to say and do in order to get the actual women I want.
sure,
Who I,
yes, yes,
yeah.
to get the women I want, or also just like
It's what good people say.
it's what good people say, and they're a leftist, and that right, right. It's like just fits in line with the rest of their politics.
Ava had a really good point recently, and I think this is what might be what we're talking about here too. Is that the with Will Ferrell and how he's basically saying, why can't my friend just be happy? And Ava pointed out is like there's this type of kind of like lefty men who were casually transphobic,
Yes.
would make fun of trans women, etc., do the tranny jokes, etc. And now they've realized, oh, that was cruel and rude, and this is just a person who's as deserving of happiness in their life as I am, and they don't deserve that kind of treatment. And so that's what they're thinking, and they're not understanding that there are legitimate concerns when we
Right.
say that a man is a woman in every category in life and law. And so they're not thinking about that. They're just thinking about, oh, we used to say shitty things about these people, and that's wrong. Let's not do that anymore. And
Right.
that's their position essentially.
Totally. I think that's totally true. And really what I take issue with in this woke bro caricature over here is the misogynist part. It's not
Okay.
I guess I'm just so fucking sick of that word. I'm
Yeah.
so sick of that word. I never want to hear that. It's been ruined, as a lot of words have. I don't want to ever hear the word patriarchy again, ever
I think, okay,
again.
where I can get onto the whole misogyny thing, and this is kind of niche into the sexology about all this, is that it does seem that there are a number of the GAMP men who are attracted to trans women, and they do say a lot of things like, oh, I don't have to have stupid conversations about avocado toast. Like basically they like them because they're like this feminine package, but with dude brain. And so that's what I meant by misogyny, not like actually hating women, but like being like, I don't want to spend my time with women. I don't understand or relate with them. I think their issues are petty and I don't care, kind of.
No, yeah.
Essentially.
You're right. And maybe I do need I never want to hear patriarchy again. And misogyny, I think, the word gives me the ick because it's the same people who are talking about the patriarchy that call every fucking thing misogynistic. But actually,
Right.
that's a good point. Misogyny does exist in the same way that misandry exists, which is so far to say some men hate women sort of irrationally, even, and lots of women hate men pretty irrationally. And so yes, that phenomenon does exist. I think I've associated misogyny with patriarchy with some type of systemic thing that I don't think is true, and that's what the activists are trying to blend those things together.
Right, like they think AGP itself is misogyny, and
yeah, right, which is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the psychology. Okay, cool. I wonder. We did it. Leave us some comments if you have any thoughts about this, if you think we were too harsh, if you think this is the sort of the direction that we need to go in to kind of win the battle over reality. And for the first time, I'm going to say like and subscribe. If you like what we're doing here, like the video, leave a comment or something just to help the algorithm. Yeah, and we will see you again soon for another conversation about autosexuality and trans ideology.
Bye, everybody.